through a meeting, I suddenly realised I should have recorded it. Excellent. Let me close that transcript. That will put me off. That's it. Wonderful. Yeah. I think, as I say, I think Sita will be joining us. We won't take up too much of your time this morning. We only have about half a dozen questions. That's all.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
it'd just be helpful for us to get some feedback from you, really, on the
Yeah.
experience. So yeah, great. So how did the rest of your week go that
It was
week?
really good, actually. We did a lot of experimenting, particularly with video. Adam's very, very skilled. He's incredibly. He's I mean, he's a lighting designer, but his passion is also video design. So he combines both. So we were playing with green and blue light and using those as green screens and blue screens to see if we could do it in situ. Yeah, had mixed, interesting results. Some mixed, some useful.
Yeah.
It's the liveness that we're trying to capture, obviously, and yeah, audiences being so digitally literate these days. That's the thing that we were finding. So yeah.
Oh, I've got Alice coming in. Hello, hi Alice.
Hi, Alice.
Hi, hello.
Great. Good to see you. I think we're just waiting for Sita Poppet-Taylor to join as well. But we'll get started in a moment as it's 9:30, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, as I say. But we'll get started. That's really helpful, actually, Rod. It's a really good sort of little sort of. Perhaps we can touch on some of those points a little bit later, and follow up. And I don't want to make it too. I'd like to make it very open. Sort of interview, really. So please meander in any direction you wish around the questions, and that's absolutely fine. Here we are. Here's Sita now. Fantastic. There we go. Hello, Sita. Hi. Morning.
Hi.
Hi, Sita.
Great. Well, we've just been chatting with Rod, and Alice has just joined us as well. So we'll get started. As I said, I don't want to take up too much of everyone's time this morning, but it's really helpful just to get a little bit of feedback on the experience of the residency and what we were doing those couple of days. So that's really helpful. So should I jump straight in? Perhaps that's a good way to start. We'll just, as I said, it's not very informal. We'll just let it go how you want. And but really, I think a good place to start. Excuse me for drifting across to remind myself of my questions, which I have written down. And Sita actually has helped me formulate a lot of these questions. So Sita, perhaps do you want me to ask the questions? Sita, are you happy to do that?
Yeah, you go for it.
And please chip in where you want to. Please do. So I think the first question perhaps is really about how you were hoping the Telepresence stage residency would inform and support your work on Taxi. What were you hoping to get from the experience?
Okay, well, we were quite openly approaching it because one of the things that we'd talked about in the R&D and several R&Ds on Taxi was the blending of reality and fantasy, that we wanted the audience to experience or question in themselves what their understanding of reality is, and to present to them the feeling that they'd either entered a film or, even more fantastical, entered a graphic novel. We talked about the use of gauzes to project thought bubbles above characters' heads, so that and to be able to do that to such a high quality, so that the audience actually couldn't quite believe their eyes. So tipping from theatre into spectacle, which is always a dangerous thing to do, believe you me. And so the reason we wanted to do that is because the Taxi driver, Dougie himself, the choreographer working with for 4 years, drove a taxi across Leeds, and his experiences were quite often quite surreal, to say the least. and the 36 or so customers getting in and out of his. Oh, here's Matt. Matt's just arrived.
Yeah, that's me now.
The 36 or so customers getting in and out of his taxi was such a range of humanity that actually he found it quite disturbing and almost unhealthy for his mental health in many ways. And so the piece explores mental health, it explores the fragility of society, and it explores how surreal it becomes when you're the only sober person in an entire population of people who are absolutely smashed off their faces, either on drugs or on alcohol or whatever. And we've all had that experience. We've been the sober person, and we've also possibly been the person, the other end of the scale. And the big question is, why do we do it? Why does society? When I've been on tour nationally, following shows around with Red Ladder, whether it's Chesterfield on a Friday night, or Sunderland on a Friday night, or Guildford on a Friday night, it's exactly the same scene. People have spent a lot of money dolling themselves up and then degrading themselves, falling over on the pavement, being sick. And, you know, I mean, it's carnage. And you go, wow, this is happening on a national scale every Friday night. Clearly, this is a traumatized society, and that's one interpretation of it. So we wanted to explore that experience for a live audience with a variety of techniques. And so when your research came in, we thought, would there be a possibility of adding, embellishing that experience through this thing? And we did have our doubts. We thought, well, what would work about that would be the whole thing about audience and about theatre, as it's a live experience. And so what are you looking at? Are you looking at something that's live or digital? And there were questions that we wanted to ask. Would it embellish the experience, or would it merely complicate it? And one of the things that we wanted to find out is, if you put actors in two different spaces, can they still relate in that human, physical, visceral way? And we weren't sure. So that was one of the things that we wanted to really look at. And if we could do this live, if we could place somebody live into a different space, so the audience experience was embellished and amplified in some way. So that's what we were looking at to try and explore. But yeah, that was why we kind of fell into it. Matt, is that sorry, you missed the question, which was, what was the reason that we thought we would be interested in this piece of research?
Yeah, what you're hoping to get out of it, really.
Yeah. Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
Or your audio is, maybe I think your audio is not coming through. One of the things about Teams, Matt, might be that in the settings you might need to assign your microphone, the correct microphone. Sometimes it goes to a different microphone. I think. Oh, he's going to leave and come back in again.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's what we were. And Adam himself was very interested. He's going to be working on the project anyway, but you know, he already said, well, you know, I've used green screens before, but I'd like to see what we can get out of it. So his expertise was very useful to us as well anyway. And I think he wanted to see, what he was saying was probably this material would be really useful pre-production, which is kind of what we were coming to the conclusion quite quickly, was that this probably wouldn't work live, but in which case Adam was saying, well, I've used green screens all the time in my creation video product to be used in production, but made pre-production. So the last show that he made for us was a show about Black Lives Matter, which opens with a black schoolboy and his English teacher in separate spaces, but in the same Marks and Spencer's, being racially profiled. And so Adam made a projection to go on the back of that would create the same kind of tension, the same kind of anxiety within the audience. But he used quite a lot of footage in Marks and Spencer's, but he did it with green screen. But it was pre-production, and therefore he was able, in pre-production, obviously, to edit and bring it to a very high standard of, final product.
Is it standard of final product that was the kind of sort of thing that most concerned you about using this technology?
Yeah, I mean, we're very, very aware. I was just saying before you came in, Sita, that we're very aware that the audience now in 2022 are highly digitally literate. And, my 13-year-old can make very high quality videos on his iPhone.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the product here in this example was very like a Doctor Who's episode in 1974. You know what I mean? It was a little bit clunky, to say the least. Sorry to be that honest, but it was really. And I think these days our audience would just it's a delicate relationship with your audience, isn't it? There's nothing to stop them unless you lock them in, getting up and walking out. It's not a good experience as a theatre director to see people walking out in swathes, and they will vote with their feet, so that relationship with the audience is crucial, obviously, to us.
Rod, can I just to clarify, when you talk about audience, you're primarily talking about a staged theatre audience, or you're not talking about an online audience?
Well, even online audience, I think, are used to seeing, with the quality of CGI. You only have to look at the latest Star Wars film that wasn't even filmed on location. It was filmed in a circular stage, with a digital background all the way around. So, and the quality of it is superb. So, audiences very quickly reach a very high bar, very, very quickly, and if you give them something simple like a black box theatre and a piece of chalk and a piece of string, you can make something remarkable and they will love it. But if you try and trick them that you're doing anything more than that, they want to know they're getting something more than that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I mean, I think this is the same.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's quite hard to compete with kind of post-production CGI film with what is essentially a live medium online. But I mean, that may be.
It's hard to compete, but you have to. I mean, my job is to compete with Netflix. It's bloody hard. I have to pull people out of their homes, put their coats on, go away from their nice warm fire, walk across town and walk into a theatre and sit for 2 hours maybe in the dark. It's not a very attractive proposition when you describe it like that. So, but theatre will die if we don't continue to do it. So there's a bit of a debate there.
Okay, I'll move on to the next question. Perhaps Matt, you may want to contribute to this one. This you have some thoughts on this as well. But I want to just ask you: did you find any of the rehearsal experience particularly interesting or thought-provoking? And did any ideas come to mind which were not linked to Taxi?
It was useful to play with it initially, just to see, and certainly off the back of it, I think we all had ideas like potentially of using the same sort of equipment, but probably not to achieve the same end, like not to create some live digital performance, but rather to create something digital within a live performance. Would that be right, Rod? I think that's we're all coming up with other ideas of using the equipment to become a component part of a live performance, rather than that being the replacement for it. Yeah, the substitute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just following on from that, then, Matt, are there things that you would like you think you would like to have adapted or changed, or is there further resources you might want to explore for that?
Not without listing all the difficulties that were, from my point of view, from performance point of view, there's so many difficulties that I was trying to fix along the way. Just very basic things, just like eye lines. I think myself and Stefania were both really struggling with eye lines, and we were trying to fix that by looking at ourselves on the monitor. And thankfully, because there was almost a 3-second delay between what I was performing and what was going, I could look one way, try and fix an eye line, and then I could check back to the TV, and I had about 3 seconds to make sure I was looking in the right spot. Now, clearly, you can't do that in an actual performance because those 3 seconds catch up with you. I don't know how you'd fix that issue, but that was kind of getting in the way of being able to play with the equipment and play with the potential of it, because just the basic requirements for me, from a performance point of view, the basic requirements, being able to look at the person you're talking to, having some sort of connection, being able to use the space, those things were already so restrictive that I was finding it hard to be broadly creative in that environment. It's quite restrictive as a performer. And don't get me wrong, because I've worked green screen before, and I've worked in very restricted shot sizes before, down to just one single eye, and that's okay. But the parameters are set very quickly by the director, and they don't change. And that was part of the problem. Was as great as it was that Adam could go out and collect more photographs and we could set up a different shot, ordinarily I wouldn't be holding 4 potential shots in my head, and the differences in terms of eyeline that would pertain to each of the shots. And that's bad enough on a set if you're trying to cheat things ever so slightly for one camera angle. But it did feel like I was cheating things every time the shot changed. We were having to cheat things again a slightly different way. And I think most performers would find that quite restrictive.
Yeah.
If it was just a single camera angle and that didn't change, that would make that a lot easier. But of course, then you have the other issue then of just audience boredom if you've got a single shot all the way through, and then you're not using the full potential of the equipment, which is to be able to shoot from different angles. So I think there'd have to be more thought about about where the cameras were placed, and so they were placed in the best place for the performer, not to make best use of the background shots that we've got. But again, that's very difficult.
That's really helpful.
Take, for example, there was one section where we were only doing a very simple thing, which was Stefania leaning forward with a note and passing it to me in this other space. And just because the camera was ever so slightly to my left, it meant that I was actually reaching behind myself, rather than reaching behind and to the left. I was actually having to reach around my own back to make it match up with the shot coming from Stefania's end, and she was actually having to reach quite far to her right. And I get that was to accommodate other shots that we were going to cut to. But then, so every time we go to a different shot, those angles are all changing ever so slightly.
Okay, that's really interesting. Did you want to jump in, Sita? Did you want to follow up?
This is really helpful, Matt. It really is, because some of the other people we've worked with have chosen to use a single shot and then sort of play around within that. And I think you're the first group we've had that's really tried to accommodate multiple different shots. So it's really helpful to get this kind of feedback. Please, please go ahead and give us those criticisms, because actually those criticisms are really helpful for us in terms of thinking about guidance for this and ways we can develop it. So eye line's obviously been one major thing. Were there any other major issues that you as a performer were encountering?
Being restricted to 2 planes. When we were trying to think, the day that you left us to play on our own, when we were trying to think of other possible uses, it quite quickly became obvious that we can only play in those 2 planes. You always had somebody in the foreground and somebody in the background, and it was difficult for us to conceive of a way to change that without that looking again like a sudden shift. Whereas ordinarily, we'd play with that in terms of the proxemics on stage. You'd play with whoever's going to go down stage and up stage, and relative to each other. That's a big part of what the audience is seeing. That's a big part of how they read relationships on the stage. Thankfully, we were in a situation in Taxi where those things were by nature restricted. But if we'd have just been in a lounge or a ballroom or whatever, and we were trying to make best use of that space to tell the story, we would need to be able to move wherever unrestricted, because otherwise there are very few occasions where I'll speak for any length of time with my back to somebody, or with my face turned away from the audience. So I found that quite restrictive. And there were things we could do within that, but it was very limited.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, maybe you touched on something earlier on about the positions of having multiple shots and movements between different shots you wanted to do, and that was very in succession. That was quite tricky. But in the actual sessions, you mentioned television several times whilst rehearsing. So I'm just wondering, what techniques did you bring from television into the residency, and what did and didn't work?
And definitely cheating eye lines. That's something that I'm used to doing. But like I say, you'd ordinarily cheat 1 eye line for 1 shot. Just being aware of shot size, I suppose. Knowing what you could and couldn't fit into the shot. It was kind of useful for us as well, playing with new bits of script. But it was quite a tight shot, which meant we could have scripts to hand just in case you lost where we were up to.
Just to elaborate a little bit on the question, perhaps. I mean, you chose a form when you chose within the Taxi. You decided you wanted to change shots from sort of looking in the mirror, looking through the front of the screen, through the side of the car, in the same sort of montage sort of format like film or television would work. So that seemed to be the sort of format you were adopting. Was that fair to say, or did you think that how did it differ, or was that an influence on what you were doing? The way one would normally make a kind of film and go into post-production and cut it? And
I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, Rod, but I don't think post-production we weren't really thinking about that, because what we were thinking about was trying to achieve the end product live. If this is supposed to be like a substitute for a live performance, or then that's what we were trying to get out of it, was like, how would we actually use this? And that was the fear for me, because it took us a day to set up a number of shots within one scene, and I was just thinking, wow, how would we achieve an entire play that potentially had different locations, different shot sizes? How would we do that? My brain was working hard enough, judge my brain as you will, but my brain was working hard enough just trying to accommodate those little cheats and notes inside my head, as well as the lines, as well as trying to create some sort of realistic character. If I'd have had to do that kind of to a scale that was, multiplying that by 10, by 12, I think I may have had a breakdown by the end of it. It just would have been too much to cope with.
Yeah.
And that's just a page. That was just a page of script.
Yeah.
Very, very. I mean, one of the reasons we were interested was a taxi is such a claustrophobic space. So we thought, well, maybe we could give the audience that experience of claustrophobia and closeness, and all social awkwardness, which is why we wanted so many shots. We didn't just want driver with passenger in the background. We wanted eyes in mirror. We wanted, side. We wanted to give that, recognize that experience of being in somebody else's car. Really, that's why we were interested to explore that. But then, as Matt says, there were so many other variables that, in order to make that work, meant that the process was really slow, and also having to work through you in Brighton, which, to be honest with you, is quite bizarre, because we're creators, we make in the room we're in, and we were kind of a little bit manipulated by you in Brighton. That's the only way to describe it. And so that, obviously, I must admit, I hadn't realized that I thought we were going to be able to just play freely and then come back to you. And of course, I hadn't realized that until after we'd started, that it was going through Brighton. So obviously the delay was also caused by the satellite delay.
Okay, well, I think that's interesting. That's very interesting. I mean, the project is kind of in. I realise that now we're in a position where we can go back into rehearsal rooms and have that visceral, physical rehearsal experience. But the sort of intention is within a world where it's that is just not possible, and and everyone is completely isolated. And that's the kind of motivation behind the project.
Can I add one thing just where I talk about those kind of the transferable skills for myself?
Sure.
And the things that I noted, particularly with lighting, it was a very strange. It was strangely lit. Now we were. I think Tom had done a very good job of trying to stage light each separate stage, but looking back at the end product, we were lit very, very differently. And also, particularly with any motion going on, so the bit we were supposed to be traveling along in the car, you would of course have all of the light flicker across, shadow flicker across faces of the. If we'd have been filming it in real life, all those things are done in real life. We were making the comparisons at the time about nowadays, and I've done shots recently in cars for short films where they just rig up the car with GoPros. It's that easy. Just have a lav mic each, put tiny cameras in every part of the car, and you just go out and drive as much as you like. The light is always perfect. It's always shared correctly. I don't know how we'd recreate that, not just in that taxi scene, but in any other scene where there was motion. Even in the theatre, you see, you'd play with various gobos, making sure that the shadows were correct. And because you'd be sharing the space, that would never look uneven between the performers. So I think trying to have two people in separate places, or more than two people in separate places, but supposedly in the one space, you'd have to take great care to make sure that all of those environmental things were considered as well, to make it, because you very quickly you can spot if something's if they're not in the same world.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I think obviously it helps if you can have lighting that's the same temperature in both locations and the same kind of lighting. I think the two rooms were lit with different lights. But
what I'm thinking is, particularly again going between the multiple shots, even if we'd have achieved some sort of motion shadows to go along with, as you would driving along the road and trees and things getting in the way of the sunlight, even if we'd have achieved that in one of the rooms, the likelihood that would match up exactly with the other one, I mean, that's like a 1 in 100 billion shot, surely, that they would match up precisely. Or maybe there is a way. I suppose I'm trying to pose that as a question, like how do you achieve that?
Yeah,
or,
yeah, no,
or is it
really
only
good.
useful if the scenes are static and fixed in one?
I mean, it is really interesting because you're the first group that's tried to do anything that's kind of environmentally located, that's outside of a room environment or so forth. So this has thrown up some really interesting questions for us around that.
But we did look at because Phoenix Dance, they did a piece. Did they do the Alice in Wonderland?
They did, but it was very surreal, and actually, although they were located in a forest situation, it was a very static space in that they weren't moving around the forest. So that, I think that was kind of why that didn't come up as an issue, and it was very highly surreal. There was kind of sort of no attempt to get an environmental ambience because it was the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. So
yeah.
I'm
just thinking in a similar location, even if there wasn't motion, if we were trying to achieve that in a theatre, you would still have you would still have gobos projecting some sort of foliage shadow across the space, and even if that was fixed in both spaces, when you mixed those two images together, it wouldn't
match
up, would it? So I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a famous way of doing that there.
All right. If I could take you away just for a minute from the what's perhaps possible today, what might be possible tomorrow, and sadly, if we haven't got a physical audience available to, there's no possible way. It's a terrible situation, I know, but if there's no way an audience can get into a theatre, and the only way you can deliver your medium is through an online experience with unlimited budget, what do you think you would want? Where would you start? What have you learned from the residency that would allow you to think, well, what can we do, guys? We can't get back into the theatre, but we've got a fantastic budget. We can do loads of things with this technology. What would you want to do?
Well, we've filmed 3 of our productions as stage productions, as a sort of poor man's MT Live, and so streaming what is clearly a theatre production with the set and lights and costumes and everything, that would, as if the audience was sitting in the theatre. I don't know how successful it's been. I mean, they look good, but they still look like pieces of theatre. They're not trying to be films. I've got an issue with it because it's kind of it isn't a film, so it doesn't have film quality, it doesn't have film direction, and it doesn't have film post-production editing either. It's just a piece of theatre that's been filmed from several angles, which is fine, but that novelty is going to run out very quickly with people, because you've got a choice between watching a really good film on Netflix and that. I didn't watch much NT Live during lockdown. I found it really annoying. I was watching things that I knew were highly successful productions, like It's True, It's True, It's True, and it just looked crap to me, and it sounded crap.
And you have those other comparisons as well of like successful theatre pieces that they've clearly decided after the fact, this was great in the theatre, but it needs to be adapted for the screen.
Yeah.
Whatever you look at, like Fleabag, and even when Fleabag, the theatre piece, was put on, the take-up of people watching that online, nowhere near that of the people watching the series.
Yeah.
Because sadly, people want really high quality production values. If it's on a flat surface in front of me, I want it to be immaculate. Yeah. And I'm saying that myself as a consumer, I want that.
So what we've done is gone to audio again, good old-fashioned audio, not really radio plays, but we did a podcast during the pandemic, and we've just been finishing making a high-quality audio series of a stage play called Smile Club, but it's been completely rewritten in serial form with additional characters and additional locations, and very, very high quality audio, so that people who like to listen to podcasts can be transported into that world hourly. So, but visually, I wouldn't touch Zoom with a barge pole. I've seen some Zoom productions, and they're awful. They're just awful. They're just not engaging at all. One company tried to do one in a house, which worked. Alice's company did a brilliant job of a murder mystery in a theatre, didn't you? Which was like a Cluedo type game, and you played it like a game, and it was set up on the screen like a game. I don't know if you want to talk about that, Alice, but that worked.
Yeah, it was very much not an adaptation of something that was on the stage. It was like we made it knowing that it always was going to be a digital thing. So I guess that's where the difference lies in. It wasn't so much an adapting something as we know that this is what the parameters that we have kind of thing. So yeah, I don't know. It's probably not what you want to.
No, that's really helpful to know, Alice. No, because I think what you're touching on there, and I think perhaps it's the difference. I mean, Rod talked about National Theatre presenting their sort of streaming out recordings of productions, and we're sort of moving into the territory of, is it television, is it film, because it's a recording, but you're talking about interaction with audiences, with a kind of using it, and it's perhaps it's something between these two things that sets this out as something quite different.
I think it's trying to capture, because you can't capture that intimacy of a theatre space necessarily. It was like, what do we replace that with, which effectively was making it into a bit of a game, so that some of it is viewing, but then the rest of it is interactive. And what actually was important with what we did was not just interaction of the audience member with the platform, where they were kind of going through and making choices and stuff, but then it was with the other people in the room to chat through what they'd seen and figure the whole thing out. Which
it's that shared experience thing that's what people go to theatre for, shared experience. That's why people go to cinema. That's the added value with those things.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we were trying to achieve.
What was that production called, Alice?
Oh, it was called Whodunit at the Coliseum. Yeah, I think it might come back in the autumn, so I can send you a link.
Right,
it's still relevant.
I think I've kind of asked all of our questions really. Some I haven't asked, but you've answered them, and we've asked further questions around certain things. It's been really helpful just to sort of get a little sort of overview from yourselves about what your kind of expectations and aims were, and where the difficulties lie. Did you want to have any last questions, Sita? Was there anything you wanted to follow up on?
No, I think that's covered it. I mean, I think it's been so helpful. I mean, I know perhaps for you it hasn't felt like the most successful experience, but I hope you've at least found it interesting. It's been really helpful for us because you've tried to do something quite different from what any of our other residencies have done, and actually it's thrown up a whole load of issues that are really useful for our research processes. So we're really grateful for your time and your creative input, and thank you very much for being so open and honest today. It's hugely helpful for the research.
Great. Well, good. Thanks. And it was useful. It was useful. It's always useful. And it got us in a room with Adam. He's so difficult to get hold of because he's so busy. So we had Adam for a few days, which means we've got him on side for Taxi now. So that's brilliant.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to seeing Taxi very much.
Great. Thanks.
All right. Well, we'll stay tuned, Sita. Maybe we can have just 5 minutes when the Red Ladder team have left, and we'll have a quick catch up. Well, thank you very much, Rod. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Alice. Thanks. It's been great working with you. Appreciate your input to the project. All right.
Very much.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
There we go.
Great.
Okay, I'll stop recording now.
Fantastic. I've taken a lot of notes. I mean, I think actually